Right now, the LEGO community is, we'll say, volatile.
This might actually be the biggest controversy on the internet right now.
This whole thing has reached an entirely different level of what the
Bricks and Minifigs is in the middle of a scandal over a $200,000 LEGO Star Wars collection.
To catch you up, about a week ago, YouTuber Reckless Ben put out a feature-length video claiming a Bricks and Minifigs store in Oregon stole $200,000 worth of LEGO Star Wars sets by not honoring a consignment agreement. And if you've heard of Bricks and Minifigs, it's because these stores are everywhere. They're secondhand LEGO stores. There's over 250 open in the US. Go to pretty much any city, you're going to find at least one. So the outcry has been a lot. And Bricks and Minifigs Corporate has put out several statements. Reckless Ben has responded. There are temporary restraining orders, lawsuits, and accusations flying all around. So let me say at the top, I am not taking a side in that debate. Here's my angle. A few days ago, I saw a statement from a Bricks and Minifigs in Greenville, South Carolina. The long and short of it is that this store says it's locally owned and operated, it's a small business. It also claims to be independently owned with, quote, its own personality, prices, and practices. And then I saw a post from Bricks and Minifigs in Schaumburg, Illinois, claiming the same thing. Or one from Chandler, Arizona. And more stores have come out with very similarly worded statements. And look, I've worked in PR. It is standard practice to give local stores a statement template to use. But it got me thinking. Crystal and Benjamin Gorman, who owned that store in Oregon, say Bricks and Minifigs Corporate forced them out of their store. They're even suing the company for wrongful termination, so if these stores are claiming to be independently owned and operated, let's examine that. How much control does corporate Bricks and Minifigs really have over one of its franchises? What can we learn about Bricks and Minifigs' franchisee agreement? And at the end of the day, who was pulling the strings at my local Bricks and Minifigs store just down the road? My name's Eric Crittenden, and this is Clutch Power, a show about the ways we love LEGO. Episode 17. Who really runs your Bricks and Minifigs store? This is an unusual episode. It's not going to be split up like a normal one. I'm going to be showing two sides of the same coin. First, we're going to hear from Tanya Hins. She is a franchise and distribution attorney at Davis Wright Tremaine LLP. We're going to take a look at Bricks and Minifigs franchisee agreement and what it says about the relationship between Bricks and Minifigs Corporate and a local store. Then I'm going to take those same questions and pose them to Ammon McNeff. He's the CEO of Bricks and Minifigs, and I want to see how he views that relationship. There's going to be a lot of kind of going back and forth between Tanya and Ammon, so I will do my best to kind of keep things on the tracks. And if you are a Clutch Power supporter, in the spirit of transparency, I've put up the entire unedited interview with Ammon. It's up right now on my Patreon. The link to join is in the show notes. And also, I had originally planned to speak with Crystal Gorman, but last minute she said Bricks and Minifigs filed a lawsuit against her and asked for a temporary restraining order against her, so she is speaking with her lawyer before talking publicly any further. However, I do have a quote from her that I'll share later on once it's relevant. Bricks and Minifigs started pretty small. Wait, I already covered this. In 2018, they had like 35 stores. In 2023, 5 years later, they had 150 stores. And last year, 2025, they announced they had over 300 Bricks and Minifigs stores either open or gonna be open soon. That's from the grand opening of a Bricks and Minifigs store early in 2026. And that day, I spoke with the store's owner about how a Bricks and Minifigs franchise works. Here's what he said.
There are, I think, less than 5 corporate stores, just based on, I think, people sold back to corporate, but the rest are individually owned. Yeah. I own this location and the Brentwood location here in Nashville. And then we have 2 more owners that own Hendersonville and Murfreesboro, so we got 4 stores here now with 3 owners, so...
What does it take to open a Bricks and Minifigs store?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, a lot of Lego.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a whole step step-by-step process with the franchise, getting approved, showing that you'll be a successful owner.
So it helps to have already had a successful Bricks Minifigs.
Yes, the second one, definitely an easier process.
Yeah. Franchises are everywhere. Probably most places you visit are franchises. UPS stores, 7-Elevens, Chick-fil-A's, H&R Blocks, Anytime Fitness. So if all these companies are doing it, there's got to be something to franchises. When I started working on this episode, I reached out to Dylan O. Adams. He is a patent attorney at Davis Wright Tremaine. I've talked to him before on the show. He put me in touch with Tanya Hins, a franchise attorney at that same law firm. Tanya's been in the business for 30 years. She has been an absolutely invaluable resource for all this. In a very general sense, can you explain the sort of franchisor-franchisee relationship?
In franchising businesses as a whole, the franchisor is the one that owns the trademark and that may have a set of operating procedures and systems that are used to operate the business under that mark. So the franchisee is the one who actually operates the business, but they're doing it by using the name and the trademark and the operating procedures that are created by the franchisor. So what the franchisee is buying is the right to use the marks and the system. And in the Bricks and Minifigs system, the initial franchise fee is $40,000. And that is paid to the franchisor. That's kind of the initial process. It protects a territory, you get some training, and you get access to the operations manual, which tells you how to operate the business. And then on an ongoing basis, you pay perhaps royalties and ad fees in a lot of franchise systems. And those are for ongoing services.
What I think will kind of be the main question here is what Bricks and Minifigs corporate, as the franchisor, do they have the right, as outlined in the franchising agreement, to basically call the shots?
They do with respect to how the franchisee operates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a big kind of vague statement.
Right. To be a little more specific, it's really common for a franchisor to specify operating hours. In the case of a restaurant, recipes, opening and closing procedures, all different kinds of operational items. The color scheme, the specific types of benches that have to be used in a restaurant or in a store, the signage, that is all controlled by the franchisor, and that's because they own the brand.
Okay, now this is where we get into specifics. I'm going to start intercutting what Tanya says with what Ammon McNeff says. He's the CEO of Bricks and Minifigs. For Bricks and Minifigs, kind of what does that relationship look like from what you've seen?
I haven't studied it in huge detail in terms of the franchise disclosure document, but it looks pretty standard. Basically, Bricks and Minifigs provides access to the methods and the procedures, permits the use of the mark, and collect money in exchange.
How much responsibility does the franchisor take for the actions of like one specific branch or location in regards to Bricks and Minifigs?
If you ask the franchisor, the answer is virtually none.
Oh, okay.
Right. So what happens when a company is using another company's trademark? If something happens at that retail store, the franchisor is likely to be sued. For example, if there's a slip and fall, or if there's a situation where, like here, there's this consignment dispute, it's likely that the franchisor will get pulled into it because their name is above the door. But the franchise agreement makes the franchisee responsible for all of its actions in operating the business. And it's really common to include an indemnification provision where if the franchisor does get drawn into a lawsuit, the franchisee is responsible for their legal fees and for any damages that they incur.
In this case, it's sort of an inverse of that, where it's the franchisor taking the action.
It does look like that. I want to be careful because I'm basing that only on Crystal's complaint, which is her allegations, and they're not proven at this point.
You're going to hear the name Crystal Gorman a lot. Remember, she is the previous owner of the Bricks and Minifigs store at the center of this.
But just reading Crystal's complaint and taking everything that's alleged in it as true, it does seem like the franchisor took the steps that led to the issue in this case.
What does that relationship look like?
So there's kind of this interdependency between the two parties. And people tend to go with franchising because the model has already been proven. They're not, taking a stab in the dark and hoping and praying that they're going to, continue to move forward, but that they are given an opportunity to determine whether or not they're going to be a good business owner with a lot less risk than somebody who is striking out on their own. But the rules they have to follow and the operations they have to follow for their front of house business side of things is dictated by the franchisor who built the system and whose brand they're using.
Is it mostly the franchisor's hands off unless something goes wrong?
I wouldn't say that. Most franchisors have a system for making sure that the franchisees are operating in accordance with their procedures and their brand standards. And that's to protect the whole brand, right? Because if you have one franchisee that's doing all kinds of things that aren't permitted, that hurts not only the franchisor, but all the other franchisees as well. So the franchisor's job is to protect the brand. Most franchisors have processes. They use something that's sometimes called a franchise business consultant, which is kind of a combination inspector and support person. They come into the location, they meet with the franchisee, they talk about things like the P&L and where there might be improvement that they could make and how they could run the store better, any violations of procedures. So that most franchisors have that kind of a process in place to ensure that procedures are being followed and the brand is being protected.
How much oversight is there of a Bricks and Minifigs location from the corporate office?
During this whole period of time, we had individuals who would, and this was right after COVID when we had transitioned to a lot of virtual visits to our stores. The oversight comes through some of those visits, but obviously, as we can see, sometimes oversight does not catch everything. But when it comes to following the basic standards, making sure that the agreements that we have with our vendors and with others are being maintained. We're not, like people aren't utilizing other people's IP and creating issues that way. We try and monitor as much as we can, but we're also human, right? Like, so mistakes can happen, things can slip through the cracks, and we just miss certain things. And
Corporate kind of has a more compliance oversight than like day-to-day operations, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So we establish certain rules that then they all are trained on, and then they are expected to maintain those rules and like through the training, and then everything else is then, like you said, the compliance and oversight.
I want to bring in a quote from Crystal. I've been talking with her back and forth, and I asked her, what was the relationship like between your store and corporate Bricks and Minifigs? She said, quote, "My relationship was good. They would check in if there were any issues, and I could always reach out. They kept tabs on social media and would let me know if any posts were against policy. And after it had not been good, we had one meeting with them and then they were unwilling to schedule any follow-up attempts at mediation." That does line up with what her lawsuit says against Bricks and Minifigs. She said Bricks and Minifigs bypassed the mediation process. That process is outlined in the franchise agreement that Crystal signed in 2023. Step 1 is a face-to-face meeting. Step 2, a non-binding mediation through the American Arbitration Association. Step 3, a binding mediation. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual termination. If you look at the franchisee agreement, there is a section for immediate termination and termination with notice. But under both sections, it has failure to make payments.
So it's interesting because 14A and 14B are inconsistent with one another. So if you look at sub 8, failure to accurately report gross revenues or to make payments of any amounts due us or any of our affiliates, and do not correct this failure within 10 days after written notice of this failure is delivered to you. That is the normal way of doing it. They have written in an inconsistent provision which eliminates that 10-day grace period. That's basically all it does. It is extremely uncommon to have immediate termination without a grace period for failure to make payments. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen that in 30 years in a franchise agreement.
I mean, especially when right below it, it says we do give you notice, actually.
Especially.
My confusion is sort of the incongruity there between, it feels like the same thing can be immediately terminated and terminated with notice.
Right. So there's a couple of different things. Number one, just because we send a notice does not mean that we are, so if there's a terminatable offense that we can go after or take action on, is not negated by the fact that if we chose to send a notice instead of immediate termination, that still doesn't negate the fact that we actually still can immediately terminate. So there's plenty of things that we can send you notice on, but obviously in some of those types of situations, I'd also just make sure that, whenever we have something, we always send it to our franchise attorney to be like, hey, what are the steps here? And our franchise attorneys were 100% on board with everything.
In the statement, you mentioned when Bricks Minifigs Corporate repossessed the store due to the former owner's financial defaults and other breaches.
There are two agreements at play. One would be an asset purchase agreement, which was entered into by that particular franchisee. And after the initial down payment, no additional payments were made on the purchase of the assets of the store. Second was then the franchise agreement, which then, based on the operations of the store, a requirement to pay monthly royalties was in place. And after a number of months where payments were being made, those payments stopped. We would send notices and let them know that, hey, we're missing this payment. Can we get caught up? Can we do some different things? Do you need accommodations? And so as we went back and forth on those things to try and help wherever we could, we then also received notice from the landlord that rent had not been paid for several months. And so in order to not allow the store to be lost to the landlord needing to collect on some of those things, BAM Corporate stepped in and paid the rent multiple times.
I'll jump in here with Crystal's claim, which says, quote, the purported defaults Bricks and Minifigs used as a pretext were problems of Bricks and Minifigs' own making and had been cured or waived. Bricks and Minifigs failed to transfer the store's bank account and property lease to the plaintiffs as required, directly causing the payment issues later cited as grounds for termination. Once plaintiffs discovered these problems, they worked with Bricks and Minifigs to cure them, and Bricks and Minifigs accepted restructured payments for many months without complaint.
It's a fair question. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to get into too much that would be, I would say, damaging to any other party. But I'll speak in generalities. Not maintaining standards of the store, not paying other vendors when payments are due, generally being in default in other aspects of the franchise agreement or the operations manual. Those are some of the breaches that could have and would have been probably referenced in that breach notice, some of the things that had been observed. But I don't remember every specific particular breach.
All of this stuff, there's paperwork on all of it. Like she would have signed some kind of purchase agreement when she bought the business, which would say what they were supposed to do with the bank account. I don't know why the franchisor had the bank account in their name. I don't know if it was previously, it's gone through several people apparently. They've had 4 or 5 different franchisees since 2016. If they had the bank account in the franchisor's name, either she was buying that cash with the business, or they, when they either had to give her the money or rename the bank account and add her as a signer or whatever. I don't know what the purchase agreement said, but there's an answer to that.
And here's what I think is the real meat of this situation, the consignment phrasing. In the franchise agreement Crystal signed, it says, quote, a franchisee may also offer consignment services. But in Bricks and Minifigs' recent statement, they said that, Crystal unlawfully entered into a consignment agreement counter to what was laid out in the operations manual. Your statement said that Bricks and Minifig doesn't allow for consignments in the operations manual. Is that correct?
There's probably a couple of different definitions that can go into consignment. But in fact, as has been attempted to be pointed out, we actually do in our franchise agreement, we reference consignment, but in the form of consignment services. Consignment services are different than consigned product. And so that's one thing to kind of also make sure that there's a differentiation between. So a consignment service, and as it's written in the franchise agreement, specifically related to parties and events and other things, would be like if I was going to be holding, like knowing that I was going to have lots of birthday parties, and I put, and I have a baker, like in the same strip mall, like 2 doors down, who bakes birthday cakes. I can go to that baker and say, hey, Mr. Baker, I would love to have your cakes be the only cakes that we use in my birthday party room. So if you'll agree to bake the cakes and then provide them to all the people who have a birthday party, I'll just take 25% of the proceeds of the cake that you just baked and the customer paid for. That would be an example of a consigned service. But this particular section of the franchise agreement that's been flying around online, it specifically talks about products, and then it jumps into the services section and it says consignment services specifically related to parties, events, things along those lines, right? And so there's a big difference. But then as a part of all of the franchise agreements, and every franchise in existence has this dual side of things. There's the franchise agreement, and then there's the operations manual. And the operations manual is kind of the living component to any franchise agreement. And so incorporated as a part of the franchise agreement is the command, essentially, like through the franchise agreement, to follow the operations manual. And so in the operations manual, and has been since I believe we became franchisees, it clearly states that the consignment of product, pawning of product, those types of things are not permitted. We buy product from people and then we sell the product.
If something in the operation manual would contradict the disclosure agreement, which one would kind of be upheld?
The franchise agreement then also has certain carve-outs that indicate that unless it violates like a state law or anything else, that the operations manual, as incorporated herein to the franchise agreement, essentially consists of new directives from the franchisor, which then need to be followed. So again, in the agreements are meant to be read on their face value, and so if something is not specifically written into an agreement, such as specific cleaning instructions during COVID, well, then where do they look to for direction from the franchisor? And that's through the operations manual.
The agreement is what governs. The agreement then says you must comply with our procedures in the operations manual. But because the operations manual can be unilaterally changed by the franchisor, that allows them to change procedures. But if you have a right to provide consignment under your contract, I don't think that it's doable to prohibit consignment under the operations manual. Right. Well, they agree to follow it, but if it contradicts the agreement, I think the contract would be the key thing. This is especially important because most franchisors don't show a franchisee the operations manual until after they sign the franchise agreement. So she would have no way of knowing that consignments were prohibited, and her agreement says they're not.
It says Crystal Law Gorman unlawfully entered into a consignment agreement.
Consignment agreements are not unlawful. Unlawful means illegal, like that they're not either not permitted by law or they're prohibited by law. So it's legal in Oregon to enter a consignment agreement. Now, it might be a breach of her contract. So it kind of comes down to whether there is something specific in the operations manual that would be enforceable against Crystal that doesn't contradict her contract.
Look, I get it. There is a lot of legalese flying around, and it is frustrating because, we want a black and white answer now. And I see a lot of comments enraged, just waiting for an answer. So I asked McNeff what people can do about it. There's a lot of, we'll just say vitriol going around the internet right now, directed at Bricks and Minifigs. I guess, what do you have to say to people who are so angry at you and your company?
Yeah, what I would say is it's understandable how people can be angry, because they've seen a very compelling video that tells a very specific story, right? And that story is, I'm a monster. That story is that Bricks Minifigs is nothing but greed. But if you were to actually ask the majority of the franchisees, the communities that we serve, the people that we work with, the ones that are also behind on their royalties or having a hard time making rent, and we step in and we pay and we do those things, not because we're looking for another gotcha, but because we genuinely care about the business owners and the communities that they serve. That's what I would say, is that not only that we shouldn't be doing anything, none of our stores should be doing anything that could potentially harm anybody in their communities. And so if there is something that's gone wrong, like in the situation with the Mansell family, if something has gone wrong, we still stand by our desire to make things right. And we want to help where we can and how we can, but we have to do it the right way. And when we work together, we can make a lot of really cool things happen. And so that to me is the community base, as well as the community structure that's built on that base that makes Bricks and Minifigs fantastic. And so what I would say is question, like the motives that other people have for why they put out negative content. What do they get for it? And oftentimes it's for monetary gain. Well, what would we ever get by taking somebody's product? Nothing but like problems. And so in reality, the two don't really match up. They so in reality, like I would say, understand where what motivations are coming from. And if you kind of look at that, you'll recognize that what we're saying and what we've put to the courts is none of this happened. None of it is as the way it was portrayed. And the inventory was not in the store when we took over the store. And whatever could be identified that might have matched the list that was eventually provided to us was attempted to be given to the family, and it was refused. And I think that what we're trying to do now is to say we still want to help recover any lost items wherever we can and however we can. Like if there's a way for us to help make him whole through finding out where, like the sets went and if they were, like otherwise, like disposed of, we can try and work through that process to help him recover whatever we can help him recover.
So you're saying your door's open if Brian wants to reach out?
Absolutely.
And there's been a lot of public outcry to individual stores that really have nothing to do with this other than they have Bricks and Minifigs in the name.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people are upset. We could argue if that's valid or not, but I think we could both agree people are upset.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is there a place they could go to express that frustration that isn't, the Bricks and Minifigs Facebook page in Nashville, Tennessee? Do you have like a channel for them?
A place for them to express their frustration?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And to a certain degree, there's probably a couple of different things that could be done. Number one, I would say if they're frustrated, first and foremost, remind yourself that what you see online is not necessarily real, right? So if there's frustration, stop and question whether or not, is this actually real? Is this how it's being portrayed? And maybe that can help with the frustration, because if you suddenly realize that somebody is creating this for clicks and to actually create outrage, is it fair to yourself as an individual to get caught up in the outrage that, creates turmoil internally because somebody else created a video that's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to make you angry. That's kind of, in my mind, that's manipulative to people, and I don't think that's genuine and honest. But if they do want to reach out to us and express their frustration about the situation, if they do have questions about that, then they can go to, I think it's complaints@bricksandminifigs.com. So we do have an email address that people can submit their complaints about the situation. And obviously it's for people who are genuinely curious and want to know what has gone on, what's been happening, and is there something that's being done to rectify it.
Again, that is complaints@bricksandminifigs.com. I put the email down in the description. This is a really hot topic. There's a lot of he said, she said, but there should be proof of this. Crystal Gorman defaulted. Let's see the receipts. Bricks and Minifigs Corporate hasn't seen the consignment agreement. Let's show it to them. And there are allegedly Lego Star Wars sets that have just up and disappeared. Where are they? These are physical objects. They're somewhere. Someone knows where they are. I will end it there. I want to say thank you to Tanya for talking with me. Her perspective and research were so helpful going into this. Thank you to my Clutch Power supporters. Again, for this episode, you can see the full unedited interview with Ammon. There is a lot that didn't make it into this episode if you're interested. And finally, thank you for listening to the show. I'm so grateful you made it this far. I really appreciate it. If you can, share the show around and follow the podcast everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. It's the same handle everywhere, clutchpower.pod. My name's Eric Crittenden. This has been Clutch Power. Stay connected.